The mountain does not care about the men inside it. On the afternoon of March 8, 1924, at 3:27 p.m., 42 tons of dynamite detonate simultaneously inside a railway tunnel in the North Carolina mountains. The explosion does not announce itself with a countdown or a warning siren. It simply happens. One moment, 204 men are working in the darkness, drilling, hauling, placing charges. The next moment, the mountain tears itself apart from within. The shock wave travels through solid rock at 5,000 meters per second, faster than the human nervous system can register pain. Men within 50 feet of the blast sites cease to exist as recognizable forms. Those farther back are crushed by collapsing tunnel walls, buried under thousands of tons of granite and sandstone, or incinerated by fireballs that consume all oxygen in the enclosed space within seconds. The tunnel becomes a crematorium 3,000 feet long. Outside, witnesses describe a sound like thunder trapped underground, a rumbling that shakes the earth for miles. Dust and smoke burst from both tunnel portals in gray columns that rise above the tree line. The official death toll settles at 204 men. 53 are never identified. Their remains are too fragmentary, too burned, or simply never found beneath the millions of pounds of collapsed mountain. This is not an accident. This is the predictable outcome of a system that values speed over survival. The tunnel, officially designated as Tunnel Number 13, is part of a railroad expansion project carving through the Blue Ridge Mountains. The year is 1924, and America is building itself into an industrial empire on the backs of men who drill and blast through stone for $3 a day. Railroad companies are racing to establish new routes through the Appalachian Barrier, connecting coastal ports to interior markets. The mountains are obstacles to be conquered, not landscapes to be respected. Construction companies bid aggressively for these contracts, promising completion dates that require continuous 24-hour shifts and the use of increasingly dangerous quantities of explosives. Tunnel Number 13 is being driven through a particularly stubborn formation of metamorphic rock, mica schist, interlayered with quartzite, that resists conventional drilling methods. The Geological Survey reports describe it as competent rock in engineering terms, meaning it holds its shape well after excavation, but this same hardness makes progress agonizingly slow. Drilling crews can advance only 3 to 4 feet per 12-hour shift using pneumatic drills powered by compressed air lines running the entire length of the tunnel. The construction company, a consortium of contractors operating under intense pressure from the railroad client, adopts a strategy of mass blasting. Instead of small, controlled charges detonated in sequence, they begin drilling hundreds of blast holes simultaneously across the entire working face, loading them all with dynamite and detonating everything at once. This technique, called shooting the heading, can advance the tunnel by 20 feet in a single blast. It also requires storing massive quantities of explosives inside an enclosed space filled with 200 men breathing the same air. If you are enjoying this documentary reconstruction of industrial disasters that shaped workplace safety laws, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new investigations every week, examining the engineering failures and corporate decisions that turned workplaces into graveyards. Dynamite is nitroglycerin absorbed into a porous material, usually diatomaceous earth or sawdust, to make it stable enough to handle. Stable, not safe. Each stick contains approximately 200 grams of explosive material capable of releasing 600,000 joules of energy when detonated. The dynamite used in Tunnel Number 13 comes in wooden crates, 50 pounds per crate, delivered by wagon to the tunnel portal every morning. The crates are stacked inside the tunnel itself, in side galleries called powder rooms. blasted into the tunnel walls specifically for storage. OSHA does not exist in 1924. Federal explosives regulations are minimal, focused primarily on transportation rather than workplace storage. The construction company follows no formal inventory system. Foremen estimate how much dynamite they will need for a blast, and crews carry it from the powder rooms to the working face in canvas bags or simply armloads of loose sticks. Blasting caps, small explosive charges that trigger the dynamite, are stored separately but transported to the blast site at the same time. The caps are friction-sensitive and shock-sensitive. Dropping one on the tunnel floor can detonate it, which can sympathetically detonate nearby dynamite, which can chain react through the entire stockpile. The men know this, everyone knows this, but production targets do not allow time for elaborate safety protocols. The tunnel must advance 30 feet per day to meet the contract schedule. This requires 2 major blasts per day, one at the end of the morning shift, one at the end of the night shift. Each blast uses between 800 and 1,200 pounds of dynamite. The math is simple and horrifying. At any given moment, there are between 2 and 3 tons of high explosives within a few hundred feet of the working crews. The tunnel itself amplifies the danger. Confined spaces concentrate explosive force rather than dissipating it into open air. A blast that might shatter windows at 300 feet in open terrain will pulverize rock at twice that distance inside a tunnel. The compression wave has nowhere to go except through the tunnel bore, accelerating as it travels, building pressure until it encounters resistance, walls, support timbers, or human bodies. The most insidious threat is not the dynamite itself, but its deterioration. Nitroglycerin sweats out of old or improperly stored dynamite, forming oily droplets on the outside of the sticks. These droplets are pure liquid explosive, far more sensitive than the stabilized form. A sweating stick of dynamite can detonate from a hard bump or even a rapid temperature change. Workers describe finding sticks in the powder rooms with visible moisture beading on their surfaces, glistening in the lantern light. Company policy, such as it exists, requires these deteriorated sticks to be disposed of, but disposal means hauling them back to the surface and detonating them in a safe area, a time-consuming process that slows production. Foremen routinely order crews to use the sweating dynamite anyway, reasoning that it will be detonated regardless, so why waste time on special handling? The second hidden danger is misfires, blast holes that fail to detonate during the main explosion. After each blast, crews must wait for the smoke and dust to clear, then return to the working face to assess the result. Sometimes they find drill holes that still contain live dynamite and blasting caps buried in fractured rock, unstable and primed. The official procedure is to carefully wash out these holes with water and recover the explosives. The actual practice is to drill new holes near the misfires and hope the next blast detonates everything. This leaves an unknown quantity of explosive material hidden in the tunnel walls, liable to detonate unexpectedly if struck by a drill bit or disturbed by vibration. The third danger is communication failure. The tunnel is too long for shouting to carry from the working face to the entrance. The company installs a rudimentary telephone system, hand-cranked field phones connected by wire strung along the tunnel wall. The wire frequently breaks due to blasting vibrations or falling rock. When communication fails, foremen use runners, men who literally sprint the half-mile from the working face to the portal to relay messages. This system introduces fatal delays. If something goes wrong at the working face, it can take 5 to 10 minutes for word to reach the surface. If the response requires equipment or personnel, add another 10 to 15 minutes. In a dynamite emergency, You do not have 15 minutes. You have seconds. Have you worked in construction, mining, or excavation? Do you know someone who has? Leave a comment sharing what safety measures, or lack thereof, you encountered. These stories matter. They are how we remember the men who paid for progress with their lives. Tunnel number 13 is not the first industrial massacre of its kind, and everyone involved knows this. 4 years earlier, in 1920, a tunnel blast in Colorado kills 47 men when a misfire detonates unexpectedly during cleanup operations. 3 years before that, a powder room explosion in a West Virginia coal mine kills 92 miners and collapses 3 miles of underground passages. The Bureau of Mines, the only federal agency with any jurisdiction over mining and tunneling safety, publishes detailed reports after each incident. The reports identify the same contributing factors every time: excessive quantities of explosives stored underground, deteriorated dynamite used without proper inspection, inadequate communication systems, insufficient ventilation after blasts, and pressure from management to maintain production schedules regardless of conditions. The reports make recommendations: limit underground explosive storage to 1 day's supply, implement mandatory inspection of all dynamite before use, install redundant communication systems, require minimum ventilation times before crews re-enter after blasting, and prohibit financial bonuses tied to speed of completion. None of these recommendations carry legal weight. They are suggestions, guidelines, best practices. Railroad companies and construction contractors are free to ignore them, and they do. The economic incentives point in the opposite direction. Contracts include substantial financial penalties for late completion and equally substantial bonuses for early completion. A project finished 1 month ahead of schedule can generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in bonus payments, money that goes to company executives and shareholders, not to the men swinging hammers and setting charges in the darkness. Every day of delay costs money. Every safety protocol that slows production costs money. The human calculation becomes grotesque but explicit. It is cheaper to pay compensation to widows than to slow down construction. Life insurance policies for tunnel workers in 1924 pay out approximately $500 per death, less than the cost of a week's delay in tunnel operations. Lawsuits are rare and usually unsuccessful. Legal doctrines like assumption of risk allow companies to argue that workers who accepted dangerous jobs also accepted the consequences. Juries, particularly in rural areas where the company is the largest employer, are reluctant to impose verdicts that might drive the company out of business and eliminate everyone's jobs. The pattern is clear and has been for years. Men die in preventable explosions, reports are written, recommendations are ignored, and construction continues. The town nearest to tunnel number 13 is called Ashford, a community of approximately 800 people living in a narrow valley between ridgelines. The town exists because of the tunnel. Before construction began, Ashford was a farming hamlet with a post office and a general store. The arrival of the railroad project transforms it overnight into a boom town of temporary housing, saloons, supply depots, and a company hospital. 2/3 of the adult male population works on the tunnel in some capacity as drillers, muckers, timber setters, powdermen, or surface crew. Their wives and children live in company housing or boarding houses within a half-mile of the tunnel portals. The economic relationship is feudal. The company owns the housing, operates the commissary where families buy food and supplies, and pays wages in company scrip that can only be redeemed at company stores. Workers who complain about conditions or refuse dangerous assignments are fired and evicted from company housing on the same day. There is no union. Attempts to organize are met with immediate termination and blacklisting from other construction projects in the region. The isolation of the location makes resistance nearly impossible. The nearest alternative employment is 30 miles away over mountain roads that are impassable half the year. Families are trapped in a system where the same entity that exposes their husbands and fathers to death also controls their shelter, food, and economic survival. The children of Ashford attend a one-room schoolhouse where the teacher can look out the window and see the tunnel portal. They play in the dirt roads where dynamite wagons pass every morning. They eat dinner with fathers who come home covered in rock dust, coughing from silica exposure, reeking of explosive residue. They learn early that work is dangerous and that danger is normal. The company hospital, a wood frame building with 12 beds, treats an average of 3 serious injuries per week: crushed hands, fractured skulls, lacerations from flying rock. The company doctor, paid by the company, determines who is fit to return to work and who qualifies for medical leave without pay. Men with broken fingers are sent back into the tunnel with crude splints because the company cannot afford to lose experienced workers. The cultural atmosphere is one of fatalism mixed with pride. These are men who define themselves by their ability to endure hardship and perform dangerous work that soft city dwellers cannot or will not do. They take pride in feeding their families through labor that would kill weaker men. This pride is both genuine and cultivated by the company, which praises real men who do not complain and mocks safety concerns as cowardice. March 8th, 1924, begins as an ordinary Saturday. The day shift enters the tunnel at 6 a.m., 204 men carrying lunch pails and hand tools, walking single file into the mountain. The morning work proceeds according to routine. Drilling crews operate pneumatic drills, boring a pattern of blast holes across the entire working face, the vertical wall of rock at the tunnel's advancing edge. Each hole is approximately 3 inches in diameter and 8 feet deep, angled slightly inward so the blast will shatter the rock and allow it to be removed rather than simply fracturing it in place. By noon, the drilling is complete. 78 blast holes cover the working face in a precise pattern designed to maximize fracture efficiency. The powder crew takes over. These are specialists who handle explosives daily, who know how many sticks of dynamite to load into each hole based on its position and angle, who splice blasting caps to detonation wire with steady hands in the darkness. They work from stacks of dynamite delivered to the working face earlier that morning, approximately 1,200 pounds of explosive in wooden crates and canvas bags. The loading takes 2 hours. Each hole receives between 4 and 8 sticks of dynamite, tamped into place with wooden rods to eliminate air gaps that would reduce blast efficiency. Blasting caps are inserted into the final stick in each hole, and wires are run back to a central blasting machine, a hand-cranked magneto generator that sends an electrical pulse down the wires to fire all caps simultaneously. At 2 p.m., the foreman orders the evacuation. Men retreat down the tunnel toward the portal, walking quickly but not running. Running shows fear, and fear is weakness. They exit into daylight and move to designated safe areas behind rock barriers at least 500 feet from the portal. The powder crew chief performs a final check, confirming that all personnel are out of the tunnel. At 2:15 p.m., he connects the firing cable to the blasting machine and cranks the handle. Nothing happens. This is not unusual. Misfires due to faulty connections or broken wires occur regularly. The powder crew waits the mandatory 15 minutes, then re-enters the tunnel to troubleshoot the problem. They discover a broken wire 50 feet from the working face, repair it with electrical tape, and return to the surface. At 2:35 p.m., they attempt the blast again. This time, the circuit completes. The electrical pulse reaches 78 blasting caps simultaneously. 78 explosions trigger sympathetically through 1,200 pounds of dynamite. The blast is successful, rock fractures, and collapses into a pile of rubble that crews will spend the next 4 hours removing. But something else happens. Somewhere in the tunnel, no one will ever know exactly where, a misfire from a previous blast, buried in the tunnel wall, detonates sympathetically from the vibration. Or a sweating stick of deteriorated dynamite in one of the powder rooms reaches critical instability. Or a pocket of methane gas, seeping from fractures in the rock, ignites from the blast heat and flashes back to a powder room. The exact trigger does not matter. What matters is that at 3:27 p.m., 42 tons of dynamite stored in 6 powder rooms along the tunnel's length detonates in a cascading sympathetic explosion. The first explosion triggers the second triggers the third. Within 4 seconds, every powder room in the tunnel is detonating. The combined force is equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. The shock wave travels through the tunnel at supersonic speed, a wall of compressed air and pulverized rock moving faster than sound. Men standing at the working face, almost 3,000 feet from the nearest powder room, are killed by the pressure wave alone before the heat or debris reaches them. Their lungs rupture, their brains hemorrhage. They drop where they stand. Behind them, the tunnel collapses in sequence, starting from the working face and progressing toward the portal, as each section's timber supports are shattered by the blast wave. Millions of pounds of rock fall inward, filling the tunnel bore with jagged granite and sandstone. The heat is apocalyptic. Fireballs roll through the tunnel at 900 degrees Celsius, hot enough to ignite clothing, hair, wooden supports, canvas, paper, flesh. Men trying to run toward the portal are overtaken by the flames, their bodies carbonized where they fall. The blast wave exits both tunnel portals with enough force to snap trees at a distance of 200 feet. Witnesses on the surface are thrown to the ground by the shock wave. A mushroom cloud of dust and smoke rises 300 feet above the tunnel entrance, visible from 10 miles away. The destruction does not end at the tunnel portals. The explosion's force, channeled through thousands of feet of solid rock, creates seismic vibrations that register on geological instruments at regional universities. Houses in Ashford, half a mile from the nearest portal, experience shattered windows and cracked foundations. The company hospital's front wall develops a vertical crack from foundation to roofline. The schoolhouse's chimney collapses, though classes have ended for the day and no children are inside. The railroad tracks leading to the tunnel portals, used for hauling out excavated rock in mine cars, are twisted into useless shapes, rails bent and ties shattered. 3 locomotives parked near the south portal are derailed by the shock wave, toppling onto their sides like toys. The economic damage exceeds $500,000, an enormous sum in 1924. Equivalent to nearly $8 million today. But this is secondary. The primary destruction is biological. 204 men entered the tunnel that morning. 0 emerge alive. The explosion kills most instantly through overpressure, thermal burns, or traumatic injuries from collapsing rock. A small number, perhaps 20 to 30, based on later forensic evidence, survive the initial blast, but die in the minutes afterward from suffocation as the fires consume all available oxygen, or from injuries that would be survivable on the surface, but are fatal when rescue is impossible. The tunnel is completely impassable. All 3,000 feet of main bore have collapsed entirely or are blocked by unstable rubble that could collapse further at any moment. Toxic gases, carbon monoxide from burning timber, sulfur, compounds from the dynamite. fill the remaining voids, making any attempt at entry suicidal. Rescue efforts begin within minutes, but are doomed before they start. Mine rescue teams arrive from neighboring sites with oxygen tanks and breathing apparatus. They attempt to enter the south portal, but are driven back by heat and smoke after penetrating only 50 feet. They try the north portal with the same result. Engineers assess the situation and deliver the conclusion everyone already understands. Anyone inside the tunnel is dead, and any attempt to reach them will only add to the body count. The decision is made to seal both portals temporarily and wait for the fires to exhaust themselves. Families gather at the tunnel entrances, held back by company guards and local police. Women scream their husbands' names into the smoking portals. Children ask when their fathers are coming home. No one has answers. The company issues a terse statement. An explosion of undetermined origin has occurred in tunnel number 13. All personnel inside are presumed deceased. Recovery operations will commence when conditions permit. The official death toll is 204 men. This number represents entire family lines erased in an afternoon. 23 widows lose husbands. 91 children lose fathers. 14 men are killed alongside their brothers, working the same shift. 6 are killed alongside their fathers. The community of Ashford loses more than a quarter of its adult male population in 4 seconds. Recovery operations begin 5 days after the explosion, once the fires have burned out and ventilation teams have cleared enough toxic gas to permit entry. Workers excavate from both portals simultaneously, shoring up unstable sections with timber and removing rubble by hand and minecart. They find the first bodies 19 feet from the south portal, 3 men who almost reached safety. The bodies are identified by wedding rings and clothing remnants. As teams penetrate deeper, recovery becomes more difficult. Bodies are found in pieces, scattered by the blast, or buried under tons of rock that must be carefully moved to avoid triggering secondary collapses. Some bodies are burned beyond recognition. The company establishes a temporary morgue in a warehouse near the tunnel where remains are laid out on wooden boards for identification by family members, an ordeal described by witnesses as unbearable. Women are brought in to view charred and dismembered remains, searching for any identifying feature: a scar, a distinctive tooth, a ring, a belt buckle. 53 bodies are never positively identified. They are buried in a mass grave in the Ashford Cemetery under a granite monument that reads, "Sacred to the memory of the unknown dead of Tunnel 13. The funeral services stretch across 2 weeks as individual bodies are claimed and buried. The company pays for coffins, but not for burial plots or services. Local churches donate space in their cemeteries. Ministers deliver eulogies in shifts, sometimes presiding over 3 funerals in a single day. The economic impact on surviving families is immediate and catastrophic. Widows receive a one-time payment of $500 from the company's insurance policy, approximately equivalent to 3 months' wages. There is no ongoing support. Women with children and no income are forced to leave Ashford and return to extended family in other towns or states, abandoning the homes they built. The town's population drops by 40% within 6 months. Businesses close. The schoolhouse shuts down due to insufficient enrollment. Ashford becomes a ghost town, haunted by the memory of a single afternoon in March when the mountain killed everyone inside it. The Bureau of Mines dispatches investigators within a week of the explosion. Their report, completed 2 months later, is thorough and damning. It identifies the cause as sympathetic detonation of excessive stored explosives triggered by unknown initiating event during routine blasting operations. It identifies contributing factors. 42 tons of dynamite stored underground exceeded any reasonable safety standard by a factor of 10. Powder rooms were located too close to active working areas. Deteriorated dynamite was found in storage. Ventilation was inadequate. Communication systems were unreliable, and management pressure to maintain production schedules led to shortcuts in safety procedures. The report recommends federal legislation to regulate explosive storage in tunneling operations, mandatory inspections, and criminal penalties for violations. None of these recommendations become law. The railroad company denies responsibility, arguing that the explosion was an unforeseeable accident and that the construction contractor, not the railroad, was responsible for on-site safety. The construction contractor declares bankruptcy 3 months after the explosion, shielding its principals from civil liability. A few widows file wrongful death lawsuits, seeking damages beyond the insurance payout. The cases drag through state courts for 3 years. 2 are dismissed on grounds of assumption of risk. 1 reaches trial and results in a verdict for the defendant company. The jury foreman later tells a newspaper that the jury sympathized with the widows, but believed that holding the company liable would discourage future industrial development in the region. The state of North Carolina conducts its own investigation, led by the state labor commissioner. His report, issued 16 months after the explosion, concludes that the disaster resulted from a regrettable but unavoidable confluence of circumstances inherent to the dangerous nature of tunneling work. It recommends no specific legislative action. The commissioner resigns 2 years later to accept a position as a vice president at a railroad equipment company. No criminal charges are filed against any individual or corporation. No executive is held personally accountable. No foreman is prosecuted. The legal and political system treats the deaths of 204 men as an operational loss, not a crime. The message is clear. Industrial progress requires industrial sacrifice, and the men who are sacrificed are simply the cost of doing business. The pattern persists because the economic incentives remain unchanged. Railroad companies award contracts to the lowest bidder, creating pressure to minimize costs. Construction contractors maximize profit by cutting expenses, and the largest expense after labor is safety. Equipment, protocols, training, and slower production schedules all reduce profitability. In contrast, speed increases it. A tunnel completed ahead of schedule generates immediate bonus payments and positions the contractor for future lucrative contracts. The workers themselves, despite bearing all the physical risk, have no leverage to demand better conditions. The labor market is saturated with men desperate for any employment. For every worker who refuses a dangerous assignment, 10 more will accept it. Union organizing is met with violent suppression. Company guards and local law enforcement collaborate to break strikes, intimidate organizers, and blacklist anyone identified as pro-union. The legal system protects capital, not labor. Wrongful death claims are nearly impossible to win. Even when successful, awards are minimal, a few $100s, barely enough to cover burial costs. Regulatory agencies lack enforcement power. The Bureau of Mines can investigate and recommend, but it cannot compel compliance. States are reluctant to impose strict regulations for fear of driving industries to other states with more permissive laws. This creates a race to the bottom where the least safe jurisdictions attract the most business. The cultural narrative supports this system. Industrial workers are celebrated as heroes, strong, stoic men who build America, but this celebration obscures their exploitation. They are heroes precisely because they accept death as part of the job. To question safety is to question one's own courage and manhood. Companies exploit this, framing safety protocols as signs of weakness and depicting workers who demand safer conditions as cowards or troublemakers. The media reinforces this framing. Newspaper coverage of industrial disasters focuses on the tragedy and heroism of rescue efforts, not on the corporate decisions that made the disaster inevitable. Editorials express sympathy for victims' families, but also emphasize the importance of industrial progress and warn against over-regulation that might slow economic growth. If you have thoughts on how workplace safety regulations developed, or failed to develop, in your country, leave a comment. The story of Tunnel 13 is not unique to America. Industrial disasters follow the same patterns globally, wherever profit is prioritized over human life. Tunnel number 13 is never completed. The railroad reroutes the line around the mountain, adding 40 miles and 2 years to the project, but avoiding the cursed site. And the tunnel portals are permanently sealed with concrete and steel in 1926. The Ashford Cemetery, where 151 identified victims are buried alongside 53 unknown, becomes a pilgrimage site for historians and safety advocates. The monument erected by survivors reads, "They died building tomorrow." Whether tomorrow was worth their lives remains an open question. Federal regulation of workplace explosives does not come until 1936, 12 years after Tunnel 13, when the Walsh-Healey Public Contracts Act imposes basic safety requirements on companies performing government contracts. Comprehensive federal workplace safety regulation does not arrive until 1970, with the creation of OSHA, 46 years too late for the men of Tunnel 13. The disaster contributes to a slow cultural shift in how industrial risk is understood. The idea that accidents are inevitable, that workers assume risk voluntarily, that safety is incompatible with efficiency, these ideas persist but begin to face organized opposition from labor movements that gain strength through the 1930s and 1940s. The dead of Tunnel 13 are invoked in union halls and legislative hearings as evidence of what happens when profit is the only consideration. The technical lessons are clear and have been clear since before Tunnel 13 exploded. Limit explosive storage, inspect materials, maintain communication, prioritize ventilation, reject production schedules that require dangerous shortcuts. These are not difficult principles. They are simply expensive. The deeper lesson is about power. Tunnel 13 happened because the people with the power to prevent it had no incentive to do so, and the people with every reason to demand prevention had no power. Until that equation changes, until workers can refuse dangerous conditions without losing their livelihoods, until executives face personal criminal liability for safety violations, until regulatory agencies have real enforcement power, disasters like Tunnel 13 remain not aberrations but inevitabilities written into the structure of industrial capitalism. 204 men went into the mountain on March 8, 1924. None came out. Their names are carved in granite in a North Carolina cemetery. This documentary is their memorial. If you found this investigation valuable, please subscribe and share it. These stories must be remembered. The men who died deserve more than silence. Thank you for watching, and remember, every safety regulation is written in blood.